but she's not here. Greetings, class number 2. And we're looking at Synoptic Gospels, Christ in the Synoptic Gospels, and we're looking at the historical background out of chapter 3. So let me hit some highlights for you. The historical empires and their impact on Palestine. This is important, I think, for us to understand and take away. And there were 3. Does anybody want to chime in on one of the 3, or
one of the 3 what?
The empires that had an impact on Palestine? 3 major empires.
Samaritans, Galileans, and Judeans.
Let's try Assyria, Babylon.
Oh, the attacker?
And Persia. Okay. Assyria is the vehicle of God's judgment on the northern kingdom. I won't have you turn and read, but 2 Kings 17, 1 through 23 tells about Assyria, and you know how God used the enemies of Israel to bring them back in line, when they were in disobedience, and when they had turned their backs on God, and he allowed the nations around them to subdue them and conquer them. Babylon was the next one. Now, where is modern Babylon? Anybody know where modern Babylon is today geographically? Or part of it. It's not the whole contained, because all of these have been divided up, obviously. But big section of Babylon is in Iraq. Right now, where all that is taking place. I don't know if you guys saw, there was a special on TV not too long. It was really good about Nebuchadnezzar, and right there where that dam is that they're fighting right now with ISIS. That was a part of what he had built. Had the water channeled down from the natural springs and things up in the mountains to come down to where they built the city, and that's originally became the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. You guys remember that's one of the 7 wonders of the world, and so they can't get into a lot of those areas, to really investigate and look back. I'm hoping one day they'll really get to do some archaeological. But in that special, this guy had snuck in at night, and he had kind of gone through the landscape and kind of shown what they believe was happening. It was pretty amazing that the water was coming down across the tops of the walls and was coming down kind of like a waterfall down the steps, and the result was that it's watering various things along the way. There were palm trees, and that were in these hanging gardens along the walls. And so if you can kind of think of it like an amphitheater, and so it was as it's cascading down, as that water's cascading down and dividing up into various areas, there are little sections where this hanging garden was. And for all intents and purposes, for many people that were looking at it, it looked like plant life and stuff suspended in the air, and being watered and taken care of. So Babylon was the instrument of God's judgment on the southern kingdom, Judah. Okay. The northern kingdom, of course, was Israel. That was Assyria that conquered there. And this is, of course, after the division. Where did the kingdoms divide? Does anybody remember that? And why? They may not have talked about that in the book. I'm just kind of asking you general.
Do you mean the southern and northern tribes? That the 10 tribes were the north, and 2 tribes were in the south.
Uh-huh. Do you remember where they divided and why?
Is there a river or something like that?
Well, I mean, why they separated? Because it's the 12 tribes of Israel. But why did they get separate kings and separate kingdoms and kind of divide off? In Bible history, what happened here was, remember, I think it was. Now I stepped in it now because I'm not going to remember the exact king's name. I want to say Rehoboam. It was the king that followed Solomon, and he asked, he got his council together, remember, and he asked them, because the whole kingdoms were together at that point. So all 12 tribes, one kingdom. And he asked them, he said, how can I, give me some feedback? And so the elder statesmen, the guys that were wise in the kingdom said, hey, these people to build the temple and all these kinds of things, they've been taxed to death. It's really been, they've been under a lot of duress. And so our advice to you is to ease up on them and to, to not tax them as much and to allow them, to thrive a little bit, own a little bit more of their property and their crops and things like this. And then he had two young guys about his age that said, those bunch of old fogies, don't listen to them. Just, in fact, add tax to them. Make it worse. Teach them who's the boss. Well, he listened to those younger guys, and that divided the kingdom. So that's how things got split. All right, so then under the third one was Persia in 2 Chronicles 36:22 through 23. Return of the Jews to Jerusalem. The Persian king decreed that the Jews were free to leave Babylon and to return to their homeland. End of the Old Testament prophecy, Malachi. The last of the Old Testament prophets spoke during this period. Okay, it talks about, let me just touch a little bit on Assyria was a cruel and a ruthless overlord to ensure that the nations were defeated. They would, and they would never again be able to rebel against their conquerors. The Assyrian king would deport large numbers of them to other parts of the Assyrian Empire, while bringing in smaller smatterings of other people into the land. So, in other words, he was the divide and conquer theory. He was scattering them all out, their leaders and everyone else, and then bringing in larger groups of people from other places. And the primary reason for that was that they would have no loyalty to that land, so they couldn't really be, hey, you guys help us fight for our land, help us fight for our religion, help us fight for whatever it was. That was a rallying point. So it's a lot of, as far as warfare and stuff, that was an intelligent thing to do to keep a people subdued. I'll skip some of this stuff, and I'll open for questions in a minute. Under the influence of the Greco-Roman Empire, what are some of the things that you remember about Greece? What did we get from Greece? What did we get from Rome? What were the strengths of those two? Do you remember?
From Rome was the way of government, wasn't it?
Yep.
Of dividing the geography. So would that be similar to what we do?
Yeah. Yeah, they had a
States
senate.
would be.
They had a senate. They had now we obviously operate a little bit differently, but they set up a form of government, representative government, and it was corrupted because it was primarily very wealthy people that bought seats in the Senate and that kind of thing. But they did set up a form of government that's been modeled around the world and all the world for different kinds of government. What do the Greeks bring to the table?
The language.
Language, okay. Let me list some things. If you want to write any of these down, you can, but it's not important. It's not on your test or anything, but it'd be good to remember some of this. But the Greeks brought math. They brought philosophy. The great philosophers of Greece, do you remember any of them? Any of their names? Plato, Socrates,
Ptolemy?
and they brought the arguments, the philosophical arguments, the criticisms, and I think it was Socrates who really enjoyed the setup style in philosophy, where he would let them establish all of their points, drawing them in, and then he would just kind of make them look like fools because he would turn their philosophy around. And it's when you think about what somebody believes, which is their philosophy, what do they believe, what are they buying into? If a person hasn't thought that through from beginning to end, what is the end result of that? Then there's a flawed there's a huge flaw in their philosophy. But also the outside of Christianity, there really is no philosophy or world philosophy that answers those four main questions. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So this was something that Greeks would play on and spend hours talking about this kind of stuff and argue and be in various camps according to some of their great philosophers. They brought language, as you said, politics, art, literature, culture. Rome brought law, administration, politics, architecture, engineering, freedom, military, might, and numerals. I don't think about Rome in terms of freedom because they were conquerors, but for their people, to have Roman citizenship was huge. It was you were a free person, and you were backed by a strong military, and so your freedom was secured. They were in power for a little over 300 years. All right, so let's talk about Hellenism. We mentioned that earlier. What was the effect of Hellenism, maybe both positively and negative, on Palestine? Actually, let's define it first. What was Hellenism?
Everything connected with the Greek, ancient Greek culture.
Okay, all right. Really, it's interesting. I was talking to Jake about, nothing is new under the sun, and we are right back there again, in America where, we're living in a time where, this is kind of coming full circle again, and it's secularism. It's, hey, we know best. We know, we're smart people, and we've got it all figured out, and so. What we need to do is eradicate these foolish belief systems that are in our way, and Christianity is one of them. Get that out of the way, and we'll be okay. Well, this is exactly what was going on in Palestine during that day. Talk about some of the effects of Hellenism, positive and negative.
It was an enemy of Judaism.
Yep. And why? I mean, what was the problem?
Because it forced their beliefs that were counter to it.
Okay, and they were not just debating with them, but they were trying to enforce this and destroy any religious system. They were trying to push in to the culture. Now, throughout history, but especially in early Christianity, because we're talking about Hellenism, but Hellenism is alive and well today as well. It's multiculturalism, and but throughout the early days of Christianity, this was problematic. It was constantly being pushed as the way things should be, and people were taught they didn't need a God up in the sky that was going to take care of them. The state and the culture were all substantive. We're going to take care of them. All right, so let's talk about the Roman Empire's contributions. What contributions did they bring when they conquered and came in? What did they bring?
Peace.
Yep, they brought peace. What did they do with respect to the Greek culture?
Did
Kept.
they empower it? Like made it?
They kept it?
Promoted it.
So we're looking at what historians call the Greco-Roman Empire, the embodiment or the marriage of those two together. Their legal system was touted, and many picked up on that and would follow it. Okay, the politics of Palestine. During the intertestamental period, the Jews found themselves in the middle of the struggle between two rival powers, the Egypt and Syria, basically. So let's stop at the beginning of that sentence. Intertestamental period. What is that?
The in-between of the Old and New
All
Testament.
right. Approximately 400 years between the end of the Old Testament, last book is Malachi, and the beginning of the New Testament, which, will begin with the Gospels. And so we had, a 400-year period. It's also referred to as the Dark Ages. So when you hear people talk about the Dark Ages, that's a term that's used by historians, especially non-religious historians. I'll talk about the dark period, and that refers to it. There not being any prophetic utterances during that period of time. Now, there were writings that took place during those 400 years that were brought to the council to be put into Scripture. The council at Nicene and other councils that were gathering together to try to put the Bible together as a whole, which is later after the New Testament has been completed. And they're trying to select the books. Now, there's a number of them. Many of them have been included in the Catholic Bible, and we know them as the apocryphal books. And they are, that word apocryphal just means hidden. And the apocryphal books included, let me ask you first, has anybody ever read any of the apocryphal books? Okay, so some of them, there's a book called Susanna, there's a book called Anna, there's a book called Bel and the Dragon. You've heard and you've read in your preparation for today in chapter 3 about the Maccabees. So the book of the Maccabees was included there, historical writings. It's not that these maybe are not all, there's no truth at all in any of these. It's just that they were found wanting when they weighed out the scales for including in the canon of Scripture, is what we call it. So there were certain rules that they had for being included in the canon of Scripture, and you had to meet certain parts of that criteria in order to be kept. Books might not meet all of them, but you needed to meet the majority of them. And among the things, I'm not going to touch on all of them because it's really not here. It's just giving you a little background on this, but was things like is the name of God mentioned in the book? Do other books reference this book, or does this book reference other books that are included in the canon of Scripture? Like, if you're reading and it says, as the prophet Isaiah said, and in the New Testament, and it's talking back about the prophet Isaiah. So that, that's some of the criteria that was being used, and these books all fell, many of them, very far short of that. Doesn't mean that they're not worthy of us looking at in terms of historical pieces. The Maccabees are a great set. Have you ever heard the term Masada? So, when the Romans conquered Jerusalem, the the Jews, the Maccabees were the ones that were fighting for the faith. And that had been going on for a long time against Hellenism, against a number of things. And it was a large family, and of course many followers. And they led the last revolt against Rome, and secured themselves on the Mount of Masada. And as the Romans as it became certain that the Romans were going to reach them, they began to leap to their death off that mountain. So many of them died in that battle, not wanting to be under Roman rule. And so you kind of, when you understand some of those things historically, maybe it makes a little more sense why that many of the Jews wanted Jesus to come as a conqueror and not as a suffering servant. They wanted him to come in and overthrow Rome, and they had seen such suffering and loss, and all of that maybe it makes a little more sense when you look in light of history. All right, so when the Greek officials tried to force a priest named Matthias to sacrifice to a pagan god, Matthias killed him, and the act started a rebellion known as the Maccabean Revolt. That's a little bit of what we talked about right there. Matthias had 5 sons known as the Maccabees, and from the Hebrew word for hammer, because they struck their enemies like hammers. But the family was more commonly known as the Hasmoneans. They won independence for the Jews for approximately 80 years, but in 47 BC, Antipater of an Edom, or Edomite, schemed his way to favor with Rome